Be looking at Daniel chapter 1 tonight. Last week we kind of departed, or I departed, I guess, from the schedule, and we spent some time kind of introducing the book of Daniel, really just studying about the historical time frame and kind of understanding why Nebuchadnezzar is where he's at and why Daniel's going to end up where he is, and kind of contributes, I think, to the overall understanding of the book itself. But tonight we're going to be looking at chapter 1 and talking about it. If you look at your handout, question number 1. Of course, if you're familiar with the book of Daniel, you'll know that Daniel had a pretty peculiar diet that was given to him while he was captive within Babylon itself. But let's talk a little bit about this idea. If you wanted to adopt a healthier eating plan, let's just start here. What are some of the things or foods that you would avoid? Sugar, okay. That would probably be a good start, right? Usually got to cut out all the carbs, right, or a lot of the carbs. What else? What do experts today tell us? Processed foods, all right. Foods that are high in fat, things of that nature. Generally, I think we understand, if there's a way that you want to look, there's a way that you have to eat. And if somebody came up to us and said, I've got this diet, I've been trying out, lost 20 pounds last week, and it goes like this: I eat a dozen donuts in the morning, and then I eat cookies after I eat lunch, and then I eat a big bowl of ice cream before I go to bed. What would you say?
I want that one.
You would say that don't work, right? And generally, there's a way that foods work and that foods don't work. And as you study, of course, this lesson tonight, and especially in Daniel chapter 1, the way that these captives were being fed should have been productive to the outcome that the king wanted from these particular people. I think it's also kind of important to point out, I doubt the standard of fitness and health and looks back then is the same that it is for us today. And generally, if you go back, you don't even have to go back in time. You do in our society or our nation, but you can just look across different cultures and different nations. What they consider healthy person differs from culture to culture. And you can go back in time in our culture and find that ideas of what a healthy person looked like then, or was supposed to look like then, versus what they're supposed to look like now, about night and day difference. So it is kind of interesting, though. There is the concept of food does, of course, determine how you're going to look on the outside. We talked a little bit about what kind of foods you would give up. What kind of foods would you eat more of? Okay, vegetables. That'd probably be a good one. What else? Lots of chicken, right? Lots of baked chicken. That's what you gotta eat if you want to, adopt this healthier style of eating or a healthier plan of eating for yourself. So let's talk a little bit here about Daniel chapter 1 and this eating plan that Nebuchadnezzar had given to all of his captives, and then, of course, what Daniel and his companions did to change that and what the outcome of that was. Let's start, though, here in the first part of chapter 1, talk a little bit about Nebuchadnezzar and, again, this idea of captivity. But when did, according to verse 1 there in Daniel 1, when did Nebuchadnezzar go to Jerusalem?
Third year.
Yeah, third year of King Jehoiakim. Remember, we talked a little bit last week about him. And basically, he was a guy who had been put into place by the Pharaoh of Egypt. Shift in world powers took place, and so now Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, they've been able to conquer the Egyptian stronghold there in the Palestinian area. And so now they take over their different nations and their different people that they had been ruling over. So Nebuchadnezzar goes to Jerusalem to basically enforce his desires, what he wants for that place, what he wants from that place, and who he wants to put in charge. Now, we've mentioned or we've studied this several times. Just try to ring a bell here or see maybe how much we've learned. What from history, when we study the three captivities of the southern kingdom or of Judah, what time frame are we talking about here?
650 BC. No traffic.
Okay, not 650. You're close though. I didn't do a very good job, did I?
605.
There you go. You had all the right numbers, just a little bit out of order there.
That's what I meant.
Yeah. Okay. I'll accept that. 605 BC, we know, is when Nebuchadnezzar comes for the first time against Jerusalem and the southern kingdom. Now, how many times does he wind up coming against Jerusalem? Yeah, 3 times. Okay, I got a few heads shaking. I guess a few of us picked up or remembered that. But basically, this is the first time that Nebuchadnezzar comes to Jerusalem. And again, that's because they've just conquered Egypt and they've basically taken over this area that Egypt has been ruling over for a very long time. When he comes, Jehoiakim smartly chooses to surrender. I guess he could have fought against Nebuchadnezzar. If he had, he'd been annihilated. And so the only smart thing to do was really give up or surrender. And because he does that, Nebuchadnezzar allows him to stay in power and places him under tribute and Judah under tribute for the space of about 3 years. Now, there's some problems that arise a little later on that Nebuchadnezzar comes and back to Jerusalem. But right now, we're just reading about the context of this first time that Nebuchadnezzar comes against Jerusalem. So he allows Jehoiakim to stay in office and basically makes him his puppet king. He says, you do what I tell you to do and act how I want you to act. You can remain king and things will go smoothly. But in that conquest, who does Nebuchadnezzar end up taking captive? Yeah, well, Daniel and his 3 friends are part of this group. But do you remember how many people end up getting carried out? 10,000. There's 10,000 captives that are carried away when Nebuchadnezzar goes against Jerusalem. And it mainly involves key political figures, anybody who had a role of leadership within that nation would have been removed too. Anybody, and think about it from this perspective too. The king would have already had all the most valuable people at his disposal. That's the king of Israel, the southern king of Judah. He would have already had, that was the nature of a king, right? If something or someone was valuable, he would take that person or he'd take that thing and he would use it for himself. And so when Nebuchadnezzar comes, he basically takes all the king's people and all the king's resources that would have been very valuable, very knowledgeable, very able people, and brings them back to Babylon for himself. In that carrying away, like was mentioned, Daniel is one of those people who were carried away, and also his 3 friends that we're going to, of course, read about as we go throughout the book of Daniel. But that was the first invasion of Judah or Jerusalem. There's going to be 2 more. Again, there's 3 in total, but this is the first one that we're reading about here. So we not only read about people being carried away captive, but question number 3 on your handout, what else happens whenever Nebuchadnezzar comes to Jerusalem? Yeah, so he basically invades the temple of God. Now remember, what was the temple like? Whose temple was this? This is Solomon's temple. What do you remember about Solomon's temple? Man, it was fancy, wasn't it? is probably one of the greatest buildings or structures as far as cost and extravagance of that day and age in the modern world. It was a lot of the things, like Steve pointed out, they were overlaid with gold. Some of them were made of pure gold. There was silver that was involved in it. There was a lot of bronze that was involved in it too. But if you look over 2 Chronicles, I mentioned 2 Chronicles and 2 Kings last week, but in 2 Chronicles chapter 36 and verse 5, here's what it says. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did evil in the sight of the Lord his God. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against him and bound him in bronze fetters to carry him off to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar also carried off some of the articles from the house of the Lord to Babylon and put them in his temple at Babylon. And so not only does he carry away a lot of these people that are within the city of Jerusalem, but he also enters into their most sacred and holy place, the most religious place that they had, and he took away a lot of the valuable articles that were within the temple. Now, sometimes when I think of the temple, I think of these main articles, and there were a lot of big, what I would consider big articles or objects within the temple itself. But what you have to understand too is there were a lot of small valuable articles too. There were a lot of cups, there were a lot of vessels, there were different things that the priest used in offering and in sacrifice. They weren't like what a normal person would have, though. They were very extravagant. And so when we get over into Daniel chapter 5, we're going to read about Belshazzar, and remember he brings out the cups that had been taken from the temple. Well, Nebuchadnezzar was the one who took those cups whenever he went and conquered Jerusalem the first time. But he didn't take everything out of the temple, but he does go into the temple and he does take a lot of the valuable articles, and probably I would assume from the narrative here that it's probably a lot of the smaller valuable articles, and removed them from the temple and put it into the temple of his God. Placed it in his place of worship as kind of a trophy. That was pretty common in that day and age, to show that my God's stronger than your God. We took your God's stuff and now it's in the house of my God. And that was basically the idea. But he carried them back to his temple and put them in the place of his so-called God. Now, if you remember, take just a minute here and turn over to Isaiah with me. We talked, I think whenever we studied the Kings, we talked a little bit about this when we studied Hezekiah. But in Isaiah chapter 39, this was actually a prophecy that was given that Nebuchadnezzar or the people from Babylon would come and would carry away all the articles of the temple. Carry away everything out of the temple. But if you look in Isaiah chapter 39, maybe I'll just kind of summarize this as we go through it. Hezekiah had been sick. The king of Babylon hears that he's recovered from his sickness, and so he sends him a letter and he sends him a present. And in verse 2 it says, Hezekiah was pleased with them and showed them, the representatives, the ambassadors from Babylon that came with this present in the letter, he showed them the house of his treasures, the silver and the gold and the spices and the precious ointments and all his armory, all that was found among his treasures. There was nothing in his house or in all his dominion that Hezekiah did not show them. Then Isaiah the prophet went to the king Hezekiah and said to him, what did these men say, and from where did they come to you? So Hezekiah said, they came to me from a far country, from Babylon. And he said, what have they seen, or what have they seen in your house? So Hezekiah answered, they have seen all that is in my house. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not shown them. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord of the hosts. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and what your fathers have accumulated unto this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord. So this was the beginning of that carrying away of all the riches and all the treasures that were in Babylon or in Jerusalem, and that included, of course, the temple of God. Now, did Nebuchadnezzar do it all at one time? No, he didn't. First time he came, he grabbed a lot of the smaller stuff he took with him. Second time he comes, he takes even more. The third time that he comes, he cleans house and he destroys the temple completely. But he ended up emptying all the valuable things, all the treasures that all these kings had accumulated over the years out of the house of God. And of course, Hezekiah, because of his pride, he was basically showing off everything that he had, how much riches, how many possessions, how many treasures he had. And because of that, God says Babylon's going to carry all those things away. So that's what we read of there in the first part of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar comes in, carries away some of the people captives, also enters into the temple of God and carries away a lot of the valuables within the temple too. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the people. Question 4, who were taken captive. What were the characteristics of these people who were taken captive?
Smart and attractive.
Okay, yeah, it wasn't, again, you kind of read this and you read 2 Kings 24 and 2 Chronicles 36. They were people of nobility. Okay, they were princes, they were leaders, they were people who had lots of money. They were people who would have been essential to keep the economy of Israel functioning like it had been in the past. So you take those people and you take them out, you take all the resources, the valuable resources, and you pull them out of that economy. What do you have left? You got people who you can control, right? Because you are their resources. And so you tell them what to do and they listen and they do it, because if they don't, they got no other way of surviving. And that was a pretty common trade of the Babylonian Empire. They would take the valuable people, they'd pull them out, they'd relocate them throughout the Empire of Babylon in different places. But they were people who were valuable economically, they were valuable politically, they were valuable when it came to military. A lot of these people were craftsmen, silversmiths, people who could build instruments of war for Babylon, help them out. But it wasn't just anybody and everybody too, right? Because these people, first of all, you had to be attractive. Well, that's one of the things that you'll learn about as you study about these kings of history. They didn't want ugly people surrounding them. They only wanted to look at good-looking people. And so everybody that they would bring into their empire and to help them out had to be attractive in nature. You also had to be healthy. You couldn't be sick. You couldn't have some disease. You couldn't be missing an arm or a leg. You had to be a fully healthy individual. Again, Nebuchadnezzar didn't want to take care of you. He wanted you to help him. You were his servant. You were supposed to do what you could to help him. And so you had to be able to take care of yourself. You had to be intelligent. Okay, he didn't want people who didn't have any brains upstairs trying to help out in the Babylonian Empire. He wanted people of high intelligence. And also they had to be talented individuals. There had to be something that they could do that would help him. And those are the type of people that were carried away captive into Babylon. So what does that tell you about Daniel and his 3 friends?
Smart and good looking.
That's right. They were intelligent individuals. They were talented. They were good looking. They were young. That was another important part of this program that Nebuchadnezzar was running here. But he had basically adopted this policy that he was going to strengthen his government. He was going to strengthen his management in his vast empire by taking the best people from all these other nations and using them at his disposal. And is that a pretty intelligent plan? Yeah. If you want the smartest people working for you, you want the most talented people working for you, you want the people who are going to do you the most good. And so that was what they did. They imported all these youth to be educated, to be molded in Babylonian culture, basically to become the model Babylonian citizen. So what does Nebuchadnezzar order Ashpenaz to do? We've talked a little bit about the kind of people that he was supposed to bring, but let's talk a little bit about their diet or their food.
It was special food, and also the drink was from the wine of the king. So it was the high quality stuff from his herbs and cattle and all that kind of thing. It's the very best of the best.
Yeah, what kind of food do you think the king ate?
Beach.
Was it just ordinary food?
No.
You know, this is the best the empire had to offer. You know, what kind of wine do you think he drank? Probably the most intoxicating wine that the empire had to offer. He had the best of all the empire had. And so he brought these people in, and his mindset is, we're going to train them for 3 years. We're going to train them, and they're going to work for us. And so we're going to treat them like they're part of the Babylonian Empire. I'm going to treat them like they're part of the royal family. They're going to eat what I eat. They're going to drink what I drink. And, of course, by doing that, he was also trying to assure the fact that they weren't going to dwindle away to nothing. You know, if they were out here on their own in a foreign empire and they had to vouch for themselves, it would have been a pretty difficult thing. But he wanted them to be healthy. He wanted them to stay healthy. And so he assigned, he said, they're going to eat what I drink, or eat what I eat, and they're going to drink what I drink for 3 years. So that was the orders that was given to Ashpenaz here. He's the king of the eunuchs, or the chief of the eunuchs, who's over Daniel. Now, the problem is this: if you're Daniel and your 3 friends, and you've been yanked out of the Jewish culture of a monotheistic God, first of all, of only one God, and you're placed into this Babylonian culture, and you're taught all the ways and the customs of the Babylonians, can you see a conflict of interest there? Yeah, Daniel and his friends had one of 2 choices. They could either adapt to Babylonian culture and custom, or they could keep on doing what they'd done before. And so that was the choice that was put before them, or that they had to make. Not only did they get new names, they learned how to speak a new language. They had new customs that were instilled within them, new ideas. And, you know, a new language and a new name isn't that big of a deal. It wouldn't be that big of a change. But what did create the biggest problem was what? Or at least as we're reading about it now, maybe I should say.
Their diet.
The food. Right? Why would that be a problem for a Jew?
Probably eat pork.
There were certain foods under the law of Moses that a Jew was not supposed to eat, right? I imagine the king's delicacies included some of these foods. And so Daniel and his friends knew, if we eat this food, we're going to be unclean. We're going to be defiled in the sight of God because it's against the law that he's given us. There's certain animals that we just cannot eat. What about the wine? Couldn't drink, right? I hear a lot of people argue for wine drinking in the Bible, but this is one of those passages that's pretty clear. It was off limits for the Jew, wasn't it? Daniel said we can't drink the wine. We can't eat some of these foods. If we do, we're going to be unclean. We're going to be defiled. And so these men had the choice to make. Are we going to conform to this custom? Are we going to obey the law of the king and the orders of the king? Or are we going to do what God told us to do? And that's really, when you study the book of Daniel, that's really the dilemma in almost every chapter. Are we going to let culture conform us to who and what they want us to be? Or are we going to stay faithful to God? And that's still the challenge of God's people today. Still the great battle that each one of us face. So, gave them all new names. We'll skip over that, question number 6. But if you go down through it, read about, they changed all their names. Basically, these guys had names that had to deal with Jehovah. They were changed to Babylonian gods, something to do with Babylonian gods. And so they took the name of God out of their names and assigned them some kind of Babylonian god to each one. But question number 7 here, what did Daniel determine not to do? Yeah, this is the choice you got, right? And Daniel says, right now, I'm making this choice. I'm not going to eat the king's food. I'm not going to drink the king's wine. I'm not going to conform to Babylonian culture. I'm going to be faithful to the Lord. And so he determined that from the get-go. Now again, ask yourself this question. Why would he not want it? Well, surely the king's food and drink was the best you could have in Babylon, wasn't it? He didn't want it because it would cause him to violate the laws of his God. And so it wasn't a trivial matter to Daniel to violate God's laws. He knew that this was a tremendous thing, and he had already determined in his heart he was going to be faithful to the Lord no matter the cost. We could spend a little bit of time in Romans chapter 12, 1 and 2, where we're told, be not conformed to this world. What's a conformer? How would you define a conformer?
Somebody that's what the right word does.
Yeah, basically somebody who's controlled by pressure from outside or without, right? So people want you to wear this, or people want you to say this, or they want you to eat this or drink this. If you conform or you do it because of the pressure that's put on you from the outside. As Christians today, that's what we're battling. The pressure of the world, the outside forces that people are trying to put upon us to, say this is good, and say this is bad, or do this or do that, or eat this or don't eat that. Christians aren't to be conformed by the outside pressure. And Daniel had already made that determination in his heart. That would be a good philosophy for all of us to adapt, wouldn't it? To make the determination, we're not going to be conformed to the world. We're going to be faithful to the Lord no matter what the cost is. So Daniel comes up with a request. Who does he go to with this request? Who's the first person he goes to? Okay. And what was Daniel's request? First of all, were Daniel and this guy, were they friends?
Yes.
Yeah. They formed a relationship. They had a good relationship with one another. Even though this guy was in charge of Daniel, Daniel had respect for him. He did what he told him to do. That produced a good relationship. And this guy respected Daniel. He respected Daniel from the fact that, he could probably trust him. When he told him to do something, he did it. And so Daniel comes with a request, and he just flat out says, hey, can you not make us eat the king's food and drink the king's wine? Could we be exempt from that, please? And how does this chief of the eunuchs respond?
He was afraid that he was going to end up with his head off if it went south.
Yeah, he said no, right? No, you can't be exempt. What's going to happen here? First of all, the king said, I got to feed you this and you got to drink this. You got to eat this, you got to drink this. That's what the king told him. And if king comes along and he looks at you and you guys start looking puny and everybody else is looking good, and he starts inquiring, what's he going to find out? He's going to find out I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. Then what's going to happen to me? Well, he would have been put to death. What? Disobeying the king's orders. Do you fault this guy? I don't think anybody would look upon a person in the world and say, I can't believe it. That's understandable. It's your job. It's your life. And so this guy says, I want to keep my job. I want to keep on living. And I'm not going to disobey the orders of the king. So what does Daniel do next?
He has 10 days.
Okay?
And if he's not better, I guess I don't know what happened after that. That was his request, 10 days tomorrow.
Yeah, and who does he go to this time?
Whoever the chief had appointed over those four.
Yeah, so the chief of the eunuchs had appointed some kind of servant that he had who was personally responsible for Daniel and his 3 friends. And so Daniel tried to do this, didn't get accomplished with the upper management. And so he goes directly to the guy in charge of him. And this is one of those things, again, I think it shows you a little bit about Daniel's intelligence and wisdom. The first time he comes and he asks just flat out, hey, can we not do this? And he got shut down, right? So now he comes and he says, listen, would you be willing to give us a 10-day trial? You know, would you be willing to let us change our diet? We want to just eat vegetables and drink water. And if our outward health or our outward appearance begins to deteriorate, if you can tell a difference between us and the rest of the people, then we'll scratch it. And again, this guy, the Bible says, he had favor with Daniel, or Daniel had favor with him too. Both mutual respect. And he says, yeah, sounds reasonable to me. You want to give this a whirl? Doesn't work out. I got 3 years to turn things around. So he says, yeah, we'll give it a trial run. And what happens? What was the result? Question 11 of the test.
They actually look better than the others.
Yeah, surprisingly, not only did they actually maintain, their level of a healthy appearance, they actually excelled it. So much that when you looked at them, you said, hey, what's going on with these guys? Why they look so much better than everybody else? So that was a win for the guy in charge. That was a win for the chief of the eunuchs, right? And so no outward physical harm was going to come from what Daniel and his friends were doing here. I think there's a great lesson in here, and I wish I had more time to spend on it and talk about it, but how do you act when you have to disobey a law of the land in order to obey the Lord? You think about Daniel and his friends and how they acted. Did they threaten anybody? Did they go out here and stage a big protest in the middle of Babylon? Did they try to burn down a building?
They were pretty respectful about it.
They were very respectful, weren't they? And they just simply tried their hardest to do what the Lord told them to do while being respectful to their people in charge. And I think that's a great lesson for us as Christians. Disobeying the law of the land, you don't have to be disrespectful about it, do you? You don't have to be disrespectful about physical authorities or anything like that. You do have to do what the Lord says, but you can act like a gentleman while you do it. And you read about Daniel and his friends, that's one of the things that really stands out to me about them. But God, the result of that test was they looked better than they'd ever looked before, and they looked better than any of the other people. Well, why would they want to change anything if that was the case? Question number 12 here. So what did God give to these 4 men? Knowledge and wisdom, right? How did that knowledge and wisdom come?
Through God.
Came through God. Let me ask you this. Do you think they had to study? Do you think they had to apply themselves in order to be wise and knowledgeable, or do you think they just goofed off 24/7? And God made them wise and knowledgeable. There's a principle in the scripture, and it's one of those things we can ask God for anything that we want, but if we aren't willing to work for it or we go get it, what's faith without works?
Dead.
It's dead, isn't it? So God gave them wisdom. He gave them the ability to understand. He gave them the skill to learn the material. God gives us skill to learn today. He gave them the ability to discern, to understand it, the wisdom to know how to apply it, but it wasn't without effort on their part. And so you think about that today. James 1:5 says, if you lack wisdom, ask God. He gives liberally to everyone. It'll be given to you, right? Well, will it be given without studying and applying ourselves? No, that's not the way God gives. But Daniel was given something special. What was Daniel given? The ability to understand visions and dreams. And here's kind of the one of the main points throughout the book of Daniel. I want you to think about, because there's a lot of visions, a lot of dreams that are given in the book of Daniel. Some of them are to Daniel himself, some of them are to kings. But these people were educated in Babylonian literature, in astrology, in sorcery. Did any of those things help Daniel when he was called upon to interpret dreams? Not one of those things he learned in school helped him, right? God gave him the revelation. God gave him the interpretation. And so Daniel, this gift was given to Daniel by God. Nebuchadnezzar, at the end of 3 years evaluation time, he calls these 4 men in. What does he conclude at the end of their evaluation?
None of us like those four. None of the other people were like Daniel.
Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar, he was a pretty sharp guy. He took the time to examine these people himself. Right? He didn't just tell his servants, go out here and pick me out the best men. He personally interviewed all these guys. I don't know how many there were, but there were probably a lot of people. But he wanted to be sure that he was getting the very best of all that could be offered. And the king not only examines them, but he also compares them with one another. And Daniel and his 3 friends proved to be superior to anybody else, and it wasn't even close, was it? How many times more superior were they? Let's say 10 times, not 1 time, 10 times more than anybody else. And so Nebuchadnezzar said, we got to get these guys in leadership positions immediately. These guys are the cream of the crop. They're the best of the best. They can do great things. And so they immediately get appointed to a position. We're going to do the last one here. How long did Daniel 14, last one we're going to do, how long did Daniel remain in the king's court?
First year, king size.
Yeah, anybody got any idea when that was? He was carried away in 605 BC. First year of Cyrus's reign was 537 BC. That's 68. Is that right? No, that's not right. Is that right? I didn't do the math beforehand. 68, okay. About 68 years that he was in royal foreign government serving a king. So we know that Daniel lived probably till he was in his late 80s, early to late 80s. He was carried away when he was at the youngest 14. He would have lived to be in his 80s. And so you think about that, he had a long life in royal service, but not every faithful servant of the Lord was given the blessing of long life, were they? Think about some of them whose life was cut short at a very young age. But that was Daniel's lot. That was what God had for him in mind for him. So, all right, Daniel chapter 1. Anybody got any thoughts or comments, questions before we end?